The wheels of the westbound train had clattered for 6 days straight, carrying Alara Quinn farther from everything she'd ever known. Each mile took her deeper into a country that felt less like America and more like some fever dream of rock and sky. She'd pressed her face to the window somewhere past St. Louis, watching the trees thin out and the earth crack open into colors she didn't have names for, rust and amber, and a particular shade of gray that looked like God had simply given up halfway through creation. Not that she believed much in God anymore. Not after burying her parents within 3 months of each other, watching consumption hollow them out like carved-out pumpkins. Not after the landlord came for the rent with that specific kind of smile men wore when they knew you had nothing left to bargain with except the obvious. The letter had arrived the very next day, as if fate had a sixth sense of timing. Miss Quinn, I'm a proprietor of some standing in the Montana Territory, seeking a woman of character and practical disposition for matrimony. I offer security, respect, and a partnership in building something lasting in this new country. If you possess the courage to embrace frontier life, I believe we could build something remarkable together. Respectfully, Silas Crow. She'd read it 17 times, searching for tricks in the language, but the words had seemed solid, professional. The kind of letter a successful man would write. And God, not that she believed, but still, she'd needed it to be real so badly, her hands shook holding the paper. Now, stepping off the train into the thin mountain air of Desolation Creek, Montana, Alara understood she'd been reading the letter she wanted to see, not the one that was actually written. The platform was barely more than a wooden deck nailed together with optimism and splinters. A handful of rough men loitered near the station house, their eyes tracking her movement with the kind of attention that made her skin crawl. She clutched her suitcase, everything she owned crammed into cracked leather that had belonged to her father, and scanned the crowd for someone who looked like they might own anything at all. "You the bride?" The voice came from her left. She turned and felt her stomach drop straight through to her shoes. Silas Crow looked like what you'd get if you distilled disappointment into human form. He was maybe 40, though hard living had carved an extra decade into his face. His clothes were expensive once, probably, but now they hung on him wrong. Coat stained, vest buttoned crooked, the whole ensemble arranged on his frame like someone had dressed a scarecrow in stolen goods. But it was his eyes that really told the story. Bloodshot, swimming, the whites gone yellowish at the edges. He was drunk. Not falling down drunk, but the kind of drunk that had soaked so deep into a man it became his natural state. "Mr. Crow?" Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "That's right." He looked her up and down with an expression that made her want to wrap her coat tighter, despite the afternoon heat. You'll do, I suppose. Not as young as I'd hoped, but you've got your teeth and your hair. That's something." The casual cruelty of it hit her like a slap. She was 23 years old, and she'd been called beautiful more than once back in Philadelphia, before grief and poverty had worn her down to sharp edges and shadows under her eyes. But here, in this assessment, she was livestock that had arrived in acceptable condition. She started, but he'd already grabbed her suitcase from her hand. "Come on then, saloon's this way. You'll be working tonight. We're short-staffed." "Working?" Alara followed him across the rutted dirt street, her travel-worn boots kicking up dust that tasted like copper and sage. "Mr. Crow, your letter mentioned a lot of things." He didn't slow down, didn't look back. "Reality's a bit different out here. You'll serve drinks, keep the customers happy, and we'll talk about the marriage part once you've proven you're worth the train fare I paid." The words landed like stones in her chest, each one heavier than the last. She'd paid her own train fare, borrowed the money from her late father's brother, who'd made it clear she'd better never show her face in Philadelphia again until every penny was repaid. Silas Crow hadn't paid for anything except a few sheets of paper and some well-crafted lies. The saloon sat in the middle of Desolation Creek, like a rotting tooth in an already ugly smile. 2 stories of weathered wood, with a balcony that sagged in the middle, and windows so grimy you couldn't see through them even if you wanted to. A hand-painted sign read, "Crow's Palace," in letters that might have been grand once, but now just looked desperate. Inside was worse. The smell hit her first: stale beer, old tobacco, sweat, and something else she couldn't identify, but that made her throat tighten. The afternoon light barely penetrated the filthy windows, leaving the room in a perpetual murky twilight. A bar ran along one wall, its surface scarred and sticky. Tables scattered across the floor, most of them uneven. A piano in the corner that looked like it hadn't been tuned since it was carried over the Rockies. Half a dozen men occupied the space, drinking despite the early hour. They all looked up when she entered, and the weight of their attention made her want to run straight back to the train station. "Boys, this here's my new girl." Silas dropped her suitcase behind the bar with a thud that suggested he'd forgotten it contained everything she owned in the world. "She'll be serving you tonight. Be nice now. She's going to be Mrs. Crow soon enough." The laughter that followed had sharp edges. One man, bearded, missing teeth, wearing a coat that might have been bearskin once, raised his glass. "Lucky you, Silas. She's prettier than the last one." "Last one run off in the night," another man added helpfully. "Took 2 bottles of whiskey with her." Alara's hands had gone numb. There had been others. Of course there had been others. Women desperate enough to answer letters from strange men in stranger places, lured west with promises that dissolved like smoke the moment they arrived. "Where do I—" she started, but Silas was already moving toward the stairs. "Your room's upstairs, second door on the left. Dump your things and get back down here. We open for business in an hour, and I want you ready." She climbed the stairs on legs that felt disconnected from her body. The hallway upstairs was narrow and dark, lit by a single window at the far end that was so dirty it barely qualified as a light source. She found the second door, pushed it open, and stood looking at what was apparently her new life. A bed, a chair, a washstand with a cracked basin. The mattress was stained. She didn't look too closely to determine with what. A single thin blanket lay folded at the foot. The window overlooked the alley behind the saloon, offering a spectacular view of garbage and broken crates. Alara set her suitcase on the chair and sat down on the edge of the bed. The springs creaked ominously. She waited for tears to come, seemed like the appropriate response, but they didn't. She just felt hollow, scooped out, like someone had reached inside her chest and removed everything that made noise. She'd left Philadelphia to escape becoming some man's mistress, had traveled 2,000 miles to avoid selling herself in pieces. And here she was, right back in the same trap, just with different scenery. Through the thin floor, she could hear Silas moving around downstairs, the clink of bottles, his voice barking orders at someone. In a few hours, she'd go down there and serve drinks to men who looked at her like she was part of the purchase price. And tomorrow, or the next day, or whenever Silas decided he'd squeezed enough work out of her, there'd be some mockery of a marriage ceremony that would legally bind her to a drunk who saw her as property. A knock on the doorframe made her jump. She looked up to find a girl, maybe 19, standing in the hallway. Mexican or Indian, Alara couldn't tell, with long dark hair and eyes that had seen too much too young. "You need help getting ready?" The girl's English was accented but clear. "I'm Maria. I work here too." "I don't—" Alara gestured helplessly at the room. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do." Maria stepped inside, and Alara saw the bruise on her jaw, yellow-green and fading, but still visible. "You serve drinks. You smile. You don't argue when they grab at you. Just step back and keep pouring. And you don't ever go upstairs with them, no matter how much they offer. Silas gets mean about that. Says we're not that kind of establishment." The way she said it suggested Silas had very specific ideas about what kind of establishment he ran, and they all revolved around maintaining some paper-thin veneer of respectability. "How long have you been here?" Alara asked. 2 years. My father owed Silas money. This was how I paid it off." Maria's face showed nothing, but her hands twisted together. "Except the debt never gets smaller. Funny how that works." "You could leave." "And go where?" Maria gave her a look that was equal parts pity and contempt. "You see a lot of options for girls like me out here. At least Silas feeds me, gives me a roof." "He hits you. Only when he's real drunk. And only me, because I can't fight back." Maria moved to the washstand, poured water from the pitcher into the basin. He'll probably save for special occasions. You're his bride, after all. Got to keep you pretty for the wedding." The casual way she said it, like being hit was just another weather pattern to plan around, made Alara's stomach turn. "There has to be—" "There isn't." Maria's voice went flat. "This is Desolation Creek. There's the mine, the saloon, the general store, and a whole lot of nothing. The marshal's in Silas's pocket, drinks free, looks the other way. The preacher's scared of his own shadow, and every man in this town knows that girls like us don't got nobody coming to help. She pulled a plain cotton dress from somewhere, gray, worn, but clean, and laid it on the bed. Wear this tonight. Your traveling clothes are too nice. The men will think you're putting on airs. These are the only nice clothes I have. Then they'll definitely think you're putting on airs. Maria moved to the door, paused. Advice? Keep your head down. Do what he says. Don't give him reasons to get creative with punishment. And maybe, if you're real lucky and real careful, you'll find a way out before this place kills you. She left, her footsteps quiet in the hallway. Alara sat in the silence, looking at the gray dress. It was probably Maria's spare, offered as kindness in a place where kindness seemed to be rationed like water in a drought. She should be grateful, should change clothes and go downstairs and start the process of surviving this nightmare. Instead, she stood and went to the window. The alley below was empty except for a skinny dog nosing through trash. Beyond that, she could see the edge of town, buildings giving way to scrub brush, then the foothills, then mountains that looked like they could swallow a person whole. She'd run away from Philadelphia to escape a trap, had run toward Montana chasing a lie, and now she was right back where she'd started, except 2,000 miles from anything familiar, in a place where nobody would even notice if she disappeared. The sun was dropping behind the mountains, painting everything in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if she'd had any capacity left for beauty. Instead, it just looked like the world burning down in slow motion. Downstairs, Silas was yelling about something. A bottle shattered. Men laughed. Alara changed into the gray dress. It fit poorly, hung wrong, made her look washed out and tired. Perfect for what came next. She went downstairs. Optik. The evening rush at Crow's Palace was less of a rush and more of a steady trickle of men who looked like they'd been carved from the same piece of hard, mean leather. They came in covered in mine dust or trail dirt, ordered rot-gut whiskey, and settled in to drink until their wages disappeared or closing time arrived, whichever came first. Alara learned the rhythm quickly because the alternative was Silas's temper. She carried drinks, dodged hands, smiled when men said things that would have gotten them horsewhipped back in Philadelphia. The whiskey glasses were never really clean. Maria just rinsed them in questionable water between uses. And the bottles behind the bar were refilled from larger containers of stuff that definitely wasn't what the labels claimed. Smile more, Silas muttered, passing behind her at the bar. His breath could have stripped paint. You look like you're at a funeral. Yes, Mr. Crow. And don't call me that. Call me Silas. You're going to be my wife, for Christ's sake. Act like it. She swallowed the dozen responses that tried to climb out of her throat and just nodded. He moved on, shouting at someone about a card game getting too loud. The thing nobody had mentioned in their romantic notions about the frontier, and Alara had read plenty of dime novels that painted it all very differently, was how boring it was. The same conversations on repeat, the same complaints about the same bosses and the same work, the same stories about the same women in the same towns, just circles of tedium interrupted by occasional bursts of violence. She was refilling a table of miner's glasses when the door opened and someone new walked in. The room didn't go silent. That only happened in stories, but there was a definite shift in attention. Alara looked up and saw why. The man who'd entered wasn't particularly tall or broad, wasn't dressed fancy or wearing visible weapons, but he moved like someone who'd spent a lot of time in places where moving wrong got you killed. Calm, deliberate, eyes taking in the whole room before he'd made it 3 steps inside. He was maybe 35, weathered in a way that suggested actual hard living rather than just hard drinking. Dark hair, dark eyes, a scar along his jaw that looked old and honestly earned. His clothes were trail-worn but well-maintained, the mark of someone who owned one good set of everything and took care of it. He sat at the bar, 2 stools down from a drunk who was mostly asleep in his own arms. Alara approached with a cleanish glass. "What can I get you?" "Whiskey." His voice was quiet, roughened by dust or smoke or years of not using it much. "The real stuff, if you've got it." "We've got—" She started the automatic lie, but something in his expression stopped her. He knew. Of course he knew. Anyone who'd spent time in frontier saloons knew the cheap tricks. "We've got what everyone else is drinking." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close. "That'll do." She poured. He didn't drink immediately, just looked at the glass like he was deciding something. She started to move away, but his voice stopped her. "You're new." Not a question. She turned back. "I arrived today." Voluntarily. The question was so unexpected, so direct, that she forgot to lie. "I was told I'd be getting married, starting a new life. And instead you're serving watered whiskey to minors." He took a sip, didn't flinch at the taste. "Silas Crow's got a type, I'll give him that. Young, desperate, nowhere else to go." "You know him?" "Know of him. No men like him anyway." He set the glass down carefully, aligned it with a groove in the bar. "Usually ends one of two ways. Girl runs off in the middle of the night, or girl disappears and nobody asks questions." The word should have sounded threatening, but his tone was matter of fact, just stating observed reality, like commenting on the weather. "I don't plan on doing either," Ilara said, which was a lie but felt necessary. "No?" He looked at her then, really looked, and she had the uncomfortable sensation of being read like a book with large print. "What's your plan then?" "I don't see how that's your business, Mr. Hale. Rowan Hale." He pulled a coin from his pocket, set it on the bar. "And you're right, it's not my business. None of it is." He stood, left the whiskey mostly untouched, and walked to a table in the corner. Sat with his back to the wall, where he could see the whole room. Ilara collected the coin, more than the drink cost, and tried not to think about the conversation. Tried not to wonder why a stranger would care enough to comment on her situation, but not enough to actually do anything about it. The night ground on. More men came and went. Someone started a fight about a card game, and Silas broke it up with a club he kept behind the bar, cracking one man's head hard enough to leave him bleeding on the floor. Maria and another girl dragged him outside while the other players went right back to their game. Rowan Hale stayed in his corner, nursing one drink for 2 hours. Watching. She caught him looking her direction more than once, and each time he didn't look away or pretend he'd been doing something else. Just held her gaze for a moment, then went back to surveying the room. It should have been creepy. Should have set off all the warning bells that had been clanging in her head since she arrived. Instead, it just felt present, like having a witness to what was happening, even if that witness had no intention of intervening. Around midnight, Silas called last drinks. The miners grumbled but finished up, filing out into the night. Maria started collecting glasses, her movements mechanical. The other girl, Ilara still hadn't caught her name, was already gone, vanished upstairs the moment the last customer left. Ilara was wiping down tables when Silas grabbed her arm. Not bad for a first night. His grip was too tight, fingers digging into the soft flesh above her elbow. "You learn quick. That's good. Smart girls last longer." "Thank you," she said, because what else was there to say? "We'll get the preacher in tomorrow. No point waiting around. You're here. I paid for you. Might as well make it legal." He pulled her closer, and the whiskey smell intensified. "You understand what that means? Being a wife?" Every muscle in her body wanted to run, but his grip held her in place. "Yes." "Good. Because I expect Silas." The voice came from behind them. Ilara turned as much as Silas's grip allowed and saw Rowan Hale standing about 10 feet away. Still calm, still quiet. But something in his posture had changed. What? Silas didn't let go of Ilara's arm, but his attention shifted. "You're holding her too tight." Rowan's tone was conversational, almost friendly. "Can see your fingerprints from here. Might want to ease up. Might want to mind your own damn business. Might." Rowan took a step closer. "But seems like there's not much business to mind at the moment, and watching a man bruise his future wife is pretty uncomfortable for everyone involved. She's mine. I do what I want. She's a person. You do what she lets you do." Another step. Or what you think you can get away with anyway. The room had gone very still. Maria had frozen in place, arms full of dirty glasses. Even the sleeping drunk at the bar had gone quiet, like he was holding his breath. Silas let go of Ilara's arm, shoved her, really, so she stumbled against a table. "You calling me out, Hale?" "Nope, just making an observation." Rowan's hand hung loose at his side, nowhere near any weapon, but the implication was clear enough. "You can take it however you want." For a long moment, nobody moved. Ilara could hear her own heartbeat, loud in her ears, could feel the ache in her arm where Silas's fingers had been. Then Silas laughed, forced, ugly. "Hell with it. Not worth the trouble over some girl." He pointed at Ilara. "Get upstairs. We'll finish this conversation tomorrow." She didn't need to be told twice. She ran for the stairs, taking them two at a time, not looking back. Behind her, she heard Silas say something else, and Rowan's low response, but the words were lost under the sound of her own gasping breath. In her room, she locked the door, flimsy lock, but better than nothing, and collapsed on the bed. Her arm throbbed, her feet hurt. Every part of her felt bruised, inside and out. Through the thin walls, she could hear Maria moving in the next room. Could hear Silas downstairs still talking, his voice rising and falling. Could hear the night sounds of Desolation Creek filtering through the window. Dogs barking, someone singing badly, the constant whisper of wind through the canyons. She'd made a terrible mistake coming here, that much was clear, but she didn't have money for a return ticket. Didn't have anywhere to return to. Didn't have anything except the clothes in her suitcase and a rapidly shrinking number of hours before Silas made good on his plan to marry her. Elara stared at the water-stained ceiling and tried to think of a way out, but every path she followed in her mind ran into the same wall. She was alone, broke, and 2,000 miles from anyone who might care if she disappeared. The thought should have scared her. Instead, it just settled into her bones like cold water, heavy and numbing. Tomorrow, Silas would call the preacher. And unless something changed, unless she found options that currently didn't exist, she'd say whatever words were required and become Mrs. Silas Crow. The alternative was dying in this room, or in the mountains, or anywhere else she tried to run. Outside her window, the moon was rising over the peaks, full and bright, and completely indifferent to her situation. She watched it climb the sky until exhaustion pulled her under, and even then her dreams were full of trains pulling away from stations while she stood trapped on empty platforms, calling for help that never came. Morning came too early, announced by the sound of someone hammering on her door hard enough to rattle the frame. "Up. Now." Silas's voice, rough with hangover but no less mean for it. "Got work to do before the preacher comes." Elara sat up, her neck stiff from sleeping in her clothes. The gray dress was wrinkled beyond salvage, and her mouth tasted like copper and fear. Through the window, the sky was barely light, that pale, watery color that came before real sunrise. "I said now." She unlocked the door and opened it. Silas stood in the hallway, looking worse than yesterday, if that was possible. His eyes were more red than white, and he'd cut himself shaving. A line of dried blood ran down his jaw. "Preacher's coming at noon. You'll need to look presentable." He looked her up and down with an expression that suggested she'd already failed. "Maria will help you, and clean this room. It smells like desperation in here." He left before she could respond, his boots heavy on the stairs. Elara sat back down on the bed and tried to organize her thoughts into something resembling a plan. She had maybe 4 hours before a ceremony that would legally trap her here. 4 hours to find money she didn't have, transportation that didn't exist, or courage that felt increasingly theoretical. A soft knock interrupted her spiral. Maria slipped inside, carrying a dress over her arm. Not fancy, but newer than the gray thing Elara had worn last night. "He wants you to wear this." Maria laid it on the bed, then sat down beside it. "Belonged to the girl before you. She left it behind when she ran." "Did she make it?" Elara asked. "The girl who ran?" Maria's face showed nothing. "Don't know. She took off 3 months ago, middle of winter, took some supplies, a horse that didn't belong to her. Silas was furious for weeks." She paused. "Never heard she made it anywhere, though. Never heard she didn't, either. So the girl was probably dead in a canyon somewhere, frozen or starved or killed by any of the 1,000 things that could kill a person out here. But there was a chance, however small, that she'd made it to somewhere else. Anywhere else. You thinking about running?" Maria's voice was quiet, but her eyes were sharp. "I don't know what I'm thinking." "That's a yes, then." Maria stood, moved to the window. "Listen to me. If you run, you take food. You take warm clothes. You take a weapon if you can get one. And you don't go alone. There's nobody to go with." "There might be?" Maria glanced at the door, then back at Elara. "That man last night, Hale. He's camped about 2 miles north of town. Has been for 3 days buying supplies, fixing his wagon. Word is he's got a ranch somewhere up in the high country." Elara's stomach tightened. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you got about 4 hours before you become Silas's legal property. And once that happens, running gets a lot more complicated." Maria's voice stayed level, but something fierce flickered in her eyes. And because I've been here 2 years watching girls like you arrive, and I'm tired of seeing what happens next. You could come with me. No. The word was flat, final. My father's debt is real. I leave, Silas takes it out on my family, but you don't owe him anything. Those letters were lies. The promises were lies. You got no moral obligation to stay. Alara looked at the dress on the bed, pale blue, carefully mended in places, smelling faintly of lavender someone had used to try to make it nice. Another girl had worn this to her own wedding, probably with the same sick feeling in her stomach, had stood in front of a preacher and said words that sealed her fate, and then she'd run anyway. Had chosen freezing to death in the mountains over whatever life Silas had planned for her. How do I find him? Alara asked. Hale, I mean. North Road, past the last building. You'll see his camp, white canvas tent, 2 horses, a wagon. Maria moved to the door. But Alara? Don't go unless you're sure. Men like Hale, they don't rescue people out of charity. If he helps you, it'll be because he wants something. Might not be the same thing Silas wants, but it'll be something. She left, pulling the door closed behind her. Alara sat in the growing light, weighing options that all looked bad from slightly different angles. Stay and marry Silas, become property, lose what little autonomy she had left, spend however many years she had left, serving drinks and enduring whatever he decided she deserved. Run alone, probably die in the wilderness, but at least die free. Or find Rowan Hale and trade one form of dependence for another, hoping the new one would be less fatal than the old. None of them were good choices, but some bad choices were worse than others. She changed into the blue dress. It fit better than the gray one, though it was still loose through the shoulders. She brushed her hair as well as she could without a proper mirror, pinned it back with the 2 pins she owned, packed her suitcase with everything she owned, which took about 3 minutes because she barely owned anything. Then she sat and waited for the sun to climb higher, listening to the sounds of the saloon waking up below her. Silas, yelling at someone, bottles clinking, the smell of coffee, which meant someone had actually bothered to make it this morning. Around 9, she heard new voices downstairs, male, rough, the kind of laughter that had sharp edges. The morning regulars, probably, getting a head start on drinking away another day. Around 10, Maria brought her a plate of bread and some kind of meat that might have been salt pork. Alara tried to eat but couldn't get much down. Her stomach was too tight. Everything in her wound up like a spring compressed past its breaking point. Preacher's on his way, Maria said, collecting the mostly untouched plate. Silas is cleaning up. Well, trying to. He's about 6 drinks in already. Does he always drink this much? This is him sober. Maria's voice was dry. You should see him when he really gets going. After she left, Alara stood at the window and looked at the mountains. They were sharper in the full light, all edges and shadows, beautiful in the way dangerous things often were. Somewhere up there, Rowan Hale had a ranch, had a life that apparently didn't require drinking yourself stupid every day just to tolerate it. She picked up her suitcase. The hallway was empty, everyone downstairs getting ready for the show. She moved quietly, keeping to the edges where the boards creaked less, made it to the back stairs, the ones the girls used when they didn't want to be seen. The rear door of the saloon opened onto the alley. Same garbage, same broken crates, same skinny dog from yesterday. Apparently it lived here now. Alara stepped out into the morning air and didn't let herself look back. North Road, past the last building. She walked quickly, but not so fast it would draw attention. Just a woman running an errand, nothing to see here. A few people were out, shopkeeper sweeping his front step, old man sitting on a bench watching the world with rheumy eyes, couple of miners heading toward the dig site. None of them looked at her twice. The last building in Desolation Creek was a half-collapsed stable that hadn't housed horses in years. Beyond it, the road turned into a trail, and the trail disappeared into scrub brush and rocks. Alara kept walking. Her suitcase got heavy fast. The sun climbed higher and the air got thinner, and she started to wonder if Maria had been wrong about the distance. 2 miles didn't sound like much, but out here, with elevation and rough ground and fear making her heart pound too hard, it felt endless. She was about to give up and turn back. Better to face Silas's anger than die of exhaustion on a trail to nowhere, when she saw the white canvas. The camp was set back from the trail, tucked into a cluster of rocks that provided some shelter from the wind. A tent, like Maria had said. 2 horses, one bay, one gray, tied to a picket line, a wagon with its cover pulled tight, and a man crouched by a small fire, cooking something that smelled better than anything Alara had eaten in weeks. Rowan Hale looked up as she approached, his expression shifting from neutral to mildly surprised in the space of a heartbeat. "Miss Quinn." He stood, set down whatever he'd been using to poke at the fire. "You're out early." Her carefully rehearsed speech evaporated. She just stood there, suitcase in hand, breathing too hard, probably looking desperate as hell. "I assume Silas doesn't know you're here," Rowan said when she didn't speak. "The preacher's coming at noon," she managed, "for the wedding. And you'd rather be here than there." Not a question, just a statement of observed fact. "That's understandable. Maria said you have a ranch up in the high country." "I do." "She said you've been here 3 days buying supplies." "Also true." He watched her with those dark, steady eyes, not offering anything, not pulling back, just waiting to see what she'd ask for. Alara set down her suitcase. Her arm ached where Silas had grabbed her. The bruises were fully formed now, purple fingerprints against pale skin. "I need work. I'm strong. I can cook, clean, do laundry. I learn fast. I don't complain." "You're offering to work for me?" "Yes." "Instead of marrying Silas Crow?" "Yes." Rowan looked at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he gestured to a log near the fire. "Sit. You look like you're about to fall over." She sat before her legs could make the decision for her. Up close, the thing cooking on the fire revealed itself as rabbit, turning on a makeshift spit. Her stomach growled loud enough to hear. "When's the last time you ate?" Rowan asked. "Yesterday. Some bread this morning, but I couldn't—" She stopped, pulled herself together. "I can pay. Not much, but I have a little money saved and—" "I don't want your money." He pulled the rabbit off the fire, set it on a flat rock to cool. "And I don't need a cook or a laundress. Got both of those already." The hope that had been building in her chest crumbled. "Oh, but," he continued, pulling out a knife to carve the meat, "I could use help with the books, ranch accounts, inventory, that sort of thing. You read and write?" "Yes. Well, I was a school teacher before—" She gestured vaguely at everything. Before. A school teacher. Something that might have been amusement crossed his face. "From Philadelphia, judging by your accent. What's a school teacher from Philadelphia doing answering mail-order bride advertisements in Montana?" Getting desperate. The honesty surprised her, but she was too tired to lie convincingly. "My parents died. I had debts. The landlord had ideas about alternative payment methods. This seemed like the better option. And now? Now I know I was wrong." She met his eyes. "But I still need to eat, still need a roof, and I'd rather earn both doing something I'm actually qualified for than serving drinks to drunks who think I come with the whiskey." Rowan cut a piece of rabbit, offered it to her on the knife. She took it, burned her fingers a little, didn't care. It tasted like the best thing she'd ever eaten, which probably said more about her current state than the cooking. "Here's the situation," Rowan said, carving off another piece for himself. "I run a horse ranch about 30 miles north of here. It's remote. Nearest neighbor is 8 miles away. Nearest town is Desolation Creek, which tells you something about the social opportunities. I've got 3 men working for me, all of whom have been there long enough to have opinions about new arrivals. It's hard work. The winters are brutal. And if you're running from Silas, you should know he's not the type to let things go." "I understand." "Do you?" He set down the knife, looked at her directly. "Because here's what I'm offering. You come work for me, keep the books, help with correspondence, whatever else needs doing that requires reading and writing. I pay fair wages. You get your own cabin, your own space. What you do with your time otherwise is your business. But if Silas comes looking for you, which he will, that becomes a problem we both have to deal with. I won't bring trouble to your door. Too late. You're standing at my camp with his fingerprints on your arm and his wedding scheduled for—" He glanced at the sun. "About 2 hours from now. Trouble's already here. Question is whether it's trouble I'm willing to take on." Alara set down the rabbit, her appetite suddenly gone. "Why would you? You don't know me. I'm nobody to you." Rowan was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "I knew someone once, long time ago. She answered an advertisement, too. Ended up in a bad situation. Nobody helped her when she needed it. He looked up. She died there, in that bad situation. And I've thought about that a lot over the years, about who might have stepped in, who could have changed how it went. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just understand that if you come with me, you work. You earn your place. I'm not rescuing you out of charity or because I want something from you beyond what I've stated. This is employment, not salvation. You'll still have to fight your own battles. I'll just make sure the ground's a little more even when you do. It was the most honest offer anyone had made her in months, maybe years. No false promises, no pretty lies. Just a transaction between two people who both needed something. When do we leave? Alara asked. Now would be good. Rowan stood, started breaking camp with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Help me pack. We'll be gone before anyone thinks to look here. They worked quickly. Alara had never broken down a camp before, but she followed his lead, rolling the tent, securing the wagon cover, checking the horse's tack. Her hands shook a little, adrenaline finally catching up with what she'd just committed to. You ride? Rowan asked, gesturing to the gray horse. Not well. You'll learn. He helped her into the saddle. She had to hike up the blue dress in a way that would have scandalized everyone she'd grown up with, then mounted the bay himself. Stay close. The trail gets rough about 10 miles out. They rode north away from Desolation Creek, away from Silas and the preacher and the life that had almost swallowed her whole. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the air, and Alara focused on staying in the saddle and not thinking about what would happen when Silas discovered she was gone. They'd been riding maybe an hour when Rowan held up a hand, signaling stop. Alara pulled on the reins, too hard, making the gray toss its head, and listened. Behind them, distant but clear, came the sound of hoofbeats. Multiple horses, moving fast. That was faster than I expected, Rowan said, his voice calm but his posture changing. He turned the bay, positioning himself between Alara and the trail behind them. When they get here, let me talk. Don't confirm anything. Don't deny anything. Just sit quiet. What if... Sit. Quiet. 5 riders came around the bend, Silas in the lead on a black horse that looked as mean as its owner. He pulled up hard when he saw them, the other men, miners from the saloon. Alara recognized 2 of them, fanning out on either side. Hail! Silas's voice carried clear in the thin air. You got something that belongs to me. Don't recall taking anything of yours, Rowan said mildly. The girl. She's my bride. We got a wedding scheduled. Funny, I was just riding north with my new bookkeeper here. Don't know anything about a wedding. Silas's face went red. Don't play games with me. She ran this morning. You helped her. She walked into my camp on her own 2 feet and asked for work. I gave it to her. Don't see where you factor into that. She's mine. I paid for her passage. You paid for nothing, Alara said, the words coming out before she could stop them. I paid my own fare. You lied in your letters. You promised... Shut your mouth. Silas started to dismount, but Rowan's hand moved to his hip, not drawing, just resting there, and Silas froze. She's talking, Rowan said quietly. Let her finish. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept going. You promised a partnership, respect, a real life. What you offered was servitude and abuse. I'm not your bride. I'm not your property. I'm leaving. Like hell you are. Silas turned to the men behind him. Get her. Bring her back. Nobody moved. The miners looked uncomfortable, shifting in their saddles, but none of them seemed eager to challenge Rowan, who still hadn't drawn but whose hand hadn't left his hip either. Here's the situation, Silas. Rowan's voice stayed level, almost conversational. Miss Quinn has accepted employment with me. She's coming to my ranch of her own free will. You can accept that and ride back to town, or you can make this complicated. But if you make it complicated, it's going to end badly for you. I can promise you that. You threatening me? No. I'm explaining consequences. Rowan's eyes didn't leave Silas. You've got 5 men. I've got a Winchester in my saddle boot and a Colt on my hip. You're close enough that I could put bullets in 3 of you before your guns clear leather. Your friends here know that. That's why they're not moving. The silence stretched. One of the miners coughed. Silas's horse danced sideways, picking up on its rider's tension. This isn't over, Silas finally said. It is, though. Rowan's tone stayed mild. Because if you come at me or mine again, I won't stop with words, and everyone here knows I mean that. Silas stared at them both, his face working through expressions, rage, calculation, humiliation. Then he jerked his horse's head around. You're dead, Hale. Both of you. Nobody makes me look like a fool. You do that yourself, Rowan said, which probably wasn't smart but landed hard enough to make two of the miners snicker. Silas kicked his horse into a gallop, heading back toward town. The others followed, though one of them looked back at Alara with something that might have been pity or might have been warning. When they were gone, Alara realized she'd been holding her breath. She let it out in a shaky exhale. That went better than expected, Rowan said. Better? Nobody got shot. He turned the bay north again. Though he meant what he said. This isn't over, not for him. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. You stood up for yourself. That's good. Means you've got spine. He glanced back at her. You're going to need it. Life where we're going doesn't have much patience for people who can't advocate for themselves. They rode on. The trail climbed higher, the air getting thinner, the landscape shifting from scrub to pine. Alara's legs ached from the saddle, and her dress was soaked with sweat despite the cool air, but she didn't complain. Every mile between her and Desolation Creek felt like breathing room she hadn't had in days. Around midday, they stopped to water the horses at a creek that came down from the mountains, running clear and cold. Rowan handed her some dried meat from his saddlebag. We'll make the ranch by nightfall if we keep a good pace. There's a line camp about 3 hours north if you need to rest. I can keep going. Suit yourself. He studied her for a moment. You did all right back there. A lot of people would have frozen up. I was terrified. Being terrified and standing your ground anyway is called courage. Being too stupid to know you should be scared is called suicide. He mounted up again. You'll do fine. They rode through the afternoon, the landscape getting wilder and more beautiful. Peaks that made the ones around Desolation Creek look like foothills. Valleys so deep they looked like the earth had cracked open. Once, Alara saw what might have been an eagle circling high above, but she couldn't be sure. As the sun started dropping behind the western mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and amber, Rowan pointed ahead. There. That's home. The ranch sat in a wide valley, sheltered on 3 sides by ridges. A main house, log construction, solid-looking, smoke rising from the chimney. Outbuildings that suggested serious operation, barn, stable, what looked like a bunkhouse. Corrals holding horses that lifted their heads to watch the newcomers approach. And beyond it all, pasture land that stretched toward the tree line, dotted with more horses. It was beautiful in a harsh way. Isolated. The kind of place where you could disappear from the world and not be found unless you wanted to be. Rowan led them toward the main house. 3 men emerged as they approached, rough-looking, wearing work clothes, watching Alara with undisguised curiosity. Boys, this is Miss Quinn. She'll be handling the books and correspondence from now on. Rowan dismounted, helped Alara down when her legs nearly gave out. Miss Quinn, this is Jack, Thomas, and Red. They run the operation when I'm not here. Jack was the oldest, maybe 50, with a gray beard and eyes that missed nothing. Thomas looked native, Crow or Shoshone maybe, quiet and watchful. Red was younger than the others, probably mid-20s, with the kind of face that suggested he'd been handsome before life had started taking pieces out of him. Ma'am, Jack said, tipping his hat. The others nodded. I'll show you to your cabin, Rowan said. It's basic, but it's private and weatherproof. He led her past the main house to a smaller structure set apart from the others. One room, maybe 12 feet square, with a window facing the valley. Inside was a bed, a stove, a table, a chair. Simple, clean, hers. Outhouses behind the barn. We all eat together in the main house, breakfast at dawn, dinner at sunset. You don't have to join us if you don't want to, but you'll miss out on the only decent cooking within 30 miles. He set her suitcase inside the door. Get settled. Rest if you need to. We'll talk details tomorrow. He left, pulling the door closed behind him. Alara stood in the middle of the cabin, her cabin, and felt something inside her chest unclench for the first time in weeks. The bed had real blankets. The window had glass. The stove looked functional. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had since her parents died. She sat on the bed, much better than the one at Crow's Palace, and let herself cry. Not desperate tears, not scared tears, Just the release of tension she'd been carrying so long it had become part of her skeleton. Outside, she could hear voices from the main house. The horses moving in the corrals, wind in the pines, normal sounds, work sounds, the sounds of a place where people lived instead of just survived. She cried until she was empty, then washed her face in the basin on the table and unpacked her suitcase. It didn't take long, she barely owned anything, but she hung her traveling clothes on a peg, set her few belongings on the table, and tried to imagine building a life here. It seemed impossible. But then everything had seemed impossible 3 days ago, and here she was anyway. A knock on the door made her jump. She opened it to find Jack standing there holding a plate covered with a cloth. "Thought you might be hungry. Rowan said you had a rough morning." The plate held roasted meat, potatoes, bread that was still warm. Her stomach growled loud enough to embarrass her. "Thank you," she managed. "You settling in all right?" "Yes, this is very generous." Jack studied her with those sharp eyes. "Rowan said you ran from Silas Crow. That true?" "Yes." "Good. Crow's a snake. This country's got enough problems without men like him making it worse." He turned to leave, then paused. "You need anything, you let us know. We take care of our own out here." He left before she could respond. Alara ate everything on the plate, then crawled into bed as the last light faded from the sky. Through the window she could see stars appearing, more stars than she'd ever seen in Philadelphia, so many they looked like someone had spilled salt across black velvet. Tomorrow she'd start learning how to keep books for a horse ranch, would figure out how to live in this strange, hard country, would deal with whatever consequences came from running. But tonight, she was safe, fed, free. It was enough. She woke to the sound of roosters and men's voices carrying across the cold morning air. For a confused moment, Alara thought she was back in Philadelphia, in her parents' house before everything fell apart. Then she opened her eyes and saw rough-hewn logs instead of wallpaper, a wood stove instead of a fireplace, and remembered. Montana. The ranch. Freedom, or something close to it. She dressed quickly in the cold, her traveling clothes, since the blue dress was filthy from yesterday's ride, and stepped outside. The sun hadn't cleared the eastern peaks yet, but the sky was lightening, turning the valley into shades of blue and silver. Frost covered everything, making the world look like it had been dipped in sugar. The main house was already active. Through the windows she could see movement, and the smell of coffee and frying bacon made her stomach clench with hunger. She knocked, feeling awkward about it, but Jack called out, "Doors open." Inside was warmer than her cabin, heated by a massive stone fireplace and the wood stove where Thomas was cooking. The room served as kitchen, dining area, and what looked like an office space in one corner. Desk covered in papers, ledgers stacked haphazardly, the chaos of record-keeping done by people who had better things to do. "Morning," Rowan said from the table. He looked less trail-worn this morning, cleaned up, his hair still damp. "Coffee's on the stove. Help yourself." She poured a cup. It was strong enough to strip paint, but after days of Silas's watered-down swill, it tasted like heaven. Thomas slid a plate in front of her without being asked. Eggs, bacon, fried potatoes. Real food, more than she'd eaten in a single meal since leaving Philadelphia. "Eat up," Jack said, around a mouthful of his own breakfast. "First day's always the hardest. Need your strength." Red sat at the far end of the table, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not hostile exactly, but not welcoming either. Just evaluating. "After breakfast, I'll show you the books," Rowan said. "Fair warning, they're a mess. Last person who tried to keep them gave up after about 2 months. Claimed the numbers made his head hurt." "I can handle numbers." "We'll see." He didn't sound skeptical, just practical. "Ranch runs about 200 horses at any given time. We breed, train, and sell to the army mostly. Some private buyers. Business is good when we can keep track of it, which hasn't been often lately." Thomas set down a plate for himself and sat. "You ride yet?" he asked Alara. "Not well. Yesterday was rough." "I'll teach you," he said, his voice quiet but certain. "Can't work a horse ranch without knowing horses." "I appreciate that. Not charity, practicality." He shrugged. "Everyone here works. No passengers." It was the same message Rowan had given her yesterday, just from a different angle. She was starting to understand that this was how things worked out here. No one expected gratitude for basic decency, but everyone expected you to pull your weight. After breakfast, Rowan led her to the corner office space. The desk was buried under papers, receipts, half-finished ledgers, and what looked like months of unopened correspondence. "This is everything from the last 6 months," he said, sounding almost apologetic. "We've been running on memory and hope, which works until it doesn't." Alara picked up one of the ledgers, flipped through it. The handwriting was terrible, the columns didn't line up, and half the entries were incomplete. But the bones of a system were there. She could see what someone had been trying to do, even if they'd failed at the execution. "How much time do I have to fix this?" "Much as you need. But the Army contract comes up for renewal in 3 months, and they'll want current numbers on our stock, so before then would be good." "I can do that. I believe you." He pulled out a chair that had been buried under a pile of horse blankets. "Anything you need, supplies, help understanding something, ask. Nobody here will bite your head off for not knowing something." She spent the morning drowning in paperwork. It was worse than it had looked at first glance. Some receipts were water damaged, others had no dates, and the previous bookkeeper's system seemed to have been write it down somewhere and hope for the best. But Alara had managed her father's accounts when he got too sick to do it himself, and she'd kept books for the school where she taught. This was just a larger scale of the same chaos. By midday, she'd created a preliminary system, sorted papers by month, started a new ledger with proper columns, made a list of questions she couldn't answer without more information. Her hand cramped from writing, and her eyes burned from squinting at faded ink, but she'd made progress. Thomas appeared in the doorway. "Break time. Come see the horses." It wasn't really a request, so she followed him outside. The sun was high now, warming the air, melting the frost into mud. He led her to the nearest corral, where a dozen horses stood in various states of attention. "That's what we do here," Thomas said, gesturing at the animals. "Take wild ones, half-broke ones, Army cast-offs, whatever we can get. Train them into something useful, sell them for enough to keep going." "Rowan said you sell to the Army." "Mostly. They need mounts that won't spook at gunfire, horses that can handle rough country and bad weather. We're good at producing that." He opened the gate, stepped inside. "Come on." "I don't think—" "You don't have to think, just come here." She stepped into the corral, her heart picking up speed. The horses were huge up close, all muscle and potential violence. One of them, a dark bay with white socks, snorted and tossed its head. "That's Brandy," Thomas said. "She's mean, and she knows it. Stay away from her." He moved to a smaller horse, a sorrel with a calm eye. "This is Copper. He's patient. Good for learning." He showed her how to approach, how to read the horse's body language, how to touch without startling. His hands were scarred and rough, but gentle with the animal. "Why are you helping me?" Alara asked. Thomas looked at her for a moment. "Rowan helped me once. Long time ago. I was in a bad place, and he gave me work when nobody else would. Figured I'd pass it along." "What kind of bad place?" "The kind you don't ask about." His tone wasn't harsh, just final. "Everyone here has history. We don't dig into it unless someone volunteers." She understood. This was a place for people who needed distance from their past. Whatever had brought Thomas here wasn't her business. Same as her situation with Silas wasn't his. They worked with Copper for an hour, Thomas teaching her basic handling, how to lead, how to check hooves, the 1,000 small things that went into caring for an animal this size. Her back ached by the time they finished, but she'd learned more than she'd expected. "Tomorrow we'll get you in the saddle properly," Thomas said. Today was just introduction. That night at dinner, the conversation was easier. Jack told a long, rambling story about a horse that had learned to open gates, causing chaos across 3 counties before they finally caught him. Red contributed a few dry comments that suggested he'd been there for at least some of it. Rowan listened, adding corrections when the story got too embellished. Alara mostly stayed quiet, but the atmosphere was comfortable. These men had worked together long enough to have rhythms, jokes, shared history. She was the outsider, but not unwelcome. Just new. She was helping clear dishes when Jack asked, "You really run from Silas Crow?" The room went quiet. Rowan looked up from his coffee, expression unreadable. "Yes," Alara said. "Day I was supposed to marry him." "Brave or stupid," Jack mused. "Haven't decided which." "Can it be both?" Red offered. "He won't let it go," Jack continued, ignoring Red. "Man like Crow, he takes it personal when someone makes him look bad. And you did that in front of witnesses. I know. Question is what he'll do about it. Jack looked at Rowan. You think he'll come here? Eventually. Rowan's voice was calm, but something hard lived in his eyes. When he works up the nerve or the anger, whichever comes first. We should be ready then. We will be. Alara's stomach tightened. I don't want to bring trouble down on all of you. If he comes, You'll what? Rowan interrupted. Go back? Give yourself up? That's not happening. But, no buts. You work here now. That makes you one of us, and we protect our own. He looked around the table. All in favor? 3 hands went up without hesitation. Settled then. Rowan stood. We'll post a watch at night. Double-check the weapons. Make sure we're not caught unprepared. He looked at Alara. And you learn to shoot. Can't have you defenseless if things go bad. You'll learn that too, Thomas said. Same as the horses. That night, lying in her cabin with a loaded rifle Rowan had insisted she keep by the bed, Alara stared at the ceiling and tried to process what had happened. These men, strangers a week ago, were preparing to defend her against someone they barely knew, simply because she'd asked for work and Rowan had said yes. It didn't make sense by Philadelphia standards, where everything was transactional and people looked out for themselves first. But maybe that was the point. Out here, the rules were different because they had to be. Isolation forced cooperation. Harsh conditions demanded loyalty. You protected your own because if you didn't, nobody survived. She must have fallen asleep eventually because she woke to the sound of horses screaming. Alara bolted upright, heart hammering. Through the window, she could see fire. The barn was burning, flames climbing into the night sky, sparks swirling like angry stars. She grabbed the rifle and ran outside. The yard was chaos. Men running, horses panicking, the roar of fire drowning out everything else. She saw Thomas at the corral, trying to calm the animals. Jack was hauling water from the well, throwing buckets at the barn with the desperate knowledge it wouldn't be enough. Where's Rowan? She shouted at Red, who was running past with more buckets. Main house. Saw riders? The rest was lost as a beam in the barn collapsed, sending up a shower of sparks. She ran toward the house. The front door was open, light spilling out. Inside, Rowan was loading a rifle, his face hard with controlled anger. How many? He asked without looking up. I don't know. I just woke up. Stay inside. Bar the door after I leave. What's happening? Crow. He finished loading, grabbed ammunition. Set the barn to draw us out, probably planning to hit the house while we're distracted. As if to confirm, gunfire cracked from somewhere beyond the burning barn. Alara flinched, but Rowan just moved to the window, staying to the side. Listen to me, he said, voice sharp with urgency. There's a root cellar under the kitchen, trapdoor under the rug. You get down there and you stay there until someone you know comes to get you. Understand? I'm not hiding while you're not fighting either. You don't know how, and I can't worry about you and handle this at the same time. He looked at her then, and his expression was harder than she'd seen. I meant what I said about protecting you, but you need to let me do it. So get in the cellar and stay there. More gunfire. Closer now. Someone shouted, Jack's voice, she thought, and Rowan was moving, heading for the door. Wait. He turned back. Be careful, she said, which was inadequate, but all she had. Always am. Then he was gone, running toward the chaos. Alara stood frozen for a moment, torn between obedience and the urge to do something, anything. But Rowan was right. She didn't know how to fight, didn't know the ranch well enough to be useful in a battle. The best thing she could do was not become another problem he had to solve. She found the cellar door, pulled it open, descended into darkness that smelled of earth and potatoes. Above, she could hear gunfire, shouting, the crackle of flames. She sat on the dirt floor, clutching the rifle she didn't know how to use, and tried not to think about what was happening up there. Time stretched. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. The sounds of fighting continued. Shots, yelling, the crash of something heavy falling. Then a long silence that was somehow worse than the noise. Footsteps on the floor above her. Heavy. Unfamiliar rhythm. Alara tightened her grip on the rifle, trying to remember what Rowan had said about how it worked. Something about the hammer, the trigger. She was probably holding it wrong. The cellar door opened. Light spilled down. Well, hell, said a voice she recognized. Silas. Look what we have here. He descended the stairs, moving carefully, a pistol in his hand. Behind him, she could see another man, one of the miners from the confrontation on the trail. "You've caused me a lot of trouble, girl," Silas said, conversational despite the gun. "Embarrassed me in front of my whole town. Cost me a barn full of supplies. Made me ride 30 miles in the middle of the night." Alara raised the rifle, hands shaking. "Stay back." "You even know how to use that?" He kept coming, confident. "Rowan should have taught you before leaving you alone." "I'm warning you." He lunged faster than she expected, knocking the rifle aside. It went off, deafening in the enclosed space, the bullet hitting nothing but dirt wall. Then his hand was around her throat, squeezing, and she couldn't breathe. "You're coming back with me," he said, face close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "And when we get there, you're going to stand in front of that preacher and say the words. And then you're going to spend the rest of your life regretting this little adventure." Spots danced in her vision. She clawed at his hand, kicked, tried to scream, but nothing worked. He was too strong, too angry, The gunshot was different this time. Not her rifle. Silas's grip loosened, his eyes going wide with surprise. He looked down at his chest, where blood was spreading across his shirt, then up at the stairs. Rowan stood there, pistol smoking, his face utterly calm. "Let her go," he said quietly. Silas released her. She collapsed, gasping, her throat on fire. Through watering eyes, she saw Silas stumble backward, hit the wall, slide down. The other man, the miner, had his hands up, stepping away. I was just... He made me come along," the miner stammered. "Get out," Rowan said. "Tell whoever's left that if they come back, they'll end up like him." The miner ran, his footsteps thundering up the stairs and out of the house. Rowan descended into the cellar, knelt beside Alara. "You hurt?" She shook her head, still coughing, her throat feeling like someone had tried to crush it. "Can you stand?" She tried. Made it halfway before her legs gave out. Rowan caught her, steadied her, then looked at Silas. "Is he—" she started. "Yes." Rowan's voice was flat, factual. "He's dead." Silas Crow sat against the wall, eyes open but seeing nothing, the blood pooling beneath him mixing with the dirt floor. Alara stared at him, trying to feel something, horror, guilt, relief, but she just felt numb. "Come on," Rowan said. "Let's get you upstairs." He helped her climb out of the cellar. The main room was a wreck, furniture overturned, windows broken, bullet holes in the walls. Outside, the barn was still burning, but the fire had consumed most of what it could reach and was starting to die down. Jack appeared in the doorway, blood on his sleeve, but walking steady. Everyone else ran off. Thomas is checking for stragglers. He saw Alara's neck, the marks already darkening to bruises. "That bastard get to you?" "He's dead," Rowan said simply. Jack nodded like this was expected news. "Good. Save us future trouble." He looked at Alara. "You all right, miss?" "I think so." "You're tougher than you look." He moved to the window. "Barn's a loss, probably half our winter feed with it, but the horses are safe and nobody died on our side. Could have been worse." Thomas came in a few minutes later, confirming what Jack had said. The attackers had fled. 5 of them total, including Silas. 1 dead, the others scattered into the night. "They won't come back," Thomas said with certainty, not without Crow leading them. Rowan settled Alara into a chair, poured her water. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the cup. "Drink," he said. "Slowly." She did. The water hurt going down her abused throat, but it helped clear her head. "I'm sorry," she managed. "This is my fault. The barn. The danger." "Stop." Rowan's voice was gentle but firm. Crow made his choices. He could have let you go. He could have accepted the situation. He chose violence instead. That's on him, not you. "But no buts. You ran from a bad situation, asked for work, did nothing wrong." He crouched beside her chair so they were eye level. "What happened tonight was always going to happen. Men like Crow don't know how to let things go. Better it happen now, on our terms, than 6 months from now, when we weren't ready." Jack brought her a blanket. Thomas started righting the overturned furniture. Red appeared with bandages and whiskey. Apparently he had medical training, or at least frontier approximation of it. They moved around her like she was one of them, which she supposed she was now. They'd fought for her, bled for her, if Jack's wound was any indication, killed for her. The weight of that settled into her bones, heavy and complicated. What do we do about... She gestured vaguely toward the cellar, where Silas's body still lay. I'll handle it, Rowan said. Bury him somewhere remote. Nobody in Desolation Creek will ask questions. They know what kind of man he was. And the ones who came with him won't talk. They're just as guilty as he was. Will there be legal... Out here? No. He stood. The nearest marshal is 2 days' ride, and he's got enough problems without investigating what happens when a drunk attacks a ranch in the middle of the night. Self-defense is pretty clear-cut in the territories. It should have bothered her more. The casual dismissal of a man's death, the pragmatic approach to burial and consequences. But she remembered Silas's hand around her throat, the certainty in his eyes that he owned her, and couldn't find it in herself to mourn him. Red cleaned and bandaged Jack's arm, a graze, painful but not serious. Thomas went to check on the horses again. Rowan disappeared into the cellar and returned a while later, his face expressionless. It's handled, was all he said. Dawn came slowly, painting the destroyed barn in shades of pink and gold that seemed obscene given what had happened. Alara sat on the porch of the main house, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders, and watched the sun climb over the eastern peaks. Rowan sat beside her, close enough for company, but not crowding. You should rest, he said. Can't. Too keyed up. That'll last a day or two. Adrenaline hangover. You'll crash hard when it finally lets go. Voice of experience? Yeah. He was quiet for a moment. I told you about the woman I knew, the one who answered an advertisement and ended up in a bad situation. I remember. Her name was Sarah. She was my sister. He stared at the mountains, his profile hard and distant. Younger than me. Sweet girl. Believed the best in people. Answered an ad from a rancher in Colorado. By the time I found out where she'd gone and rode down there, she'd been dead 3 months. He worked her to death, literally, then buried her out back like she was livestock. Alara's throat tightened, partly from the bruising, partly from the weight of what he was telling her. I killed him, Rowan continued, voice flat. Not in a fight, not in self-defense. Just walked into his house and shot him. Then I burned the place to the ground and rode away. Nobody ever came looking for me. Nobody cared enough to investigate. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm not. He looked at her then. I tell you this so you understand. What happened tonight, what I did, I do it again without hesitation. For you, for Jack, for Thomas, for Red, for anyone who works here and trusts me to have their back. That's the deal. That's what protection means in a place like this. I understand. Do you? Because the frontier has rules, but they're not the rules you grew up with. Out here, you protect your own. You keep your word. You handle your problems without running to authorities who don't exist anyway. And sometimes that means making hard choices. Like killing a man in my defense. Like that, yes. Alara pulled the blanket tighter. The sun was fully up now, warming the air, but she still felt cold. Thank you for making that choice. You don't have to thank me. I do, though. She looked at him. You gave me work when I had nothing. Defended me when you had no obligation to. Killed to keep me safe. I don't know how to repay that. Do good work. Learn to ride. Figure out those books. He stood, offered his hand. And maybe, when you've been here long enough to know what you're choosing, decide if this life is one you want to keep living. Because it's hard. It's isolated. And nights like this happen more often than anyone likes to admit. She took his hand, let him pull her to her feet. Her legs were steadier now, her breathing easier despite the pain in her throat. I think I can handle hard, she said. I think you can too. They stood there as the ranch came to life around them, Jack starting a fire to make breakfast, Thomas bringing the horses in from the far pasture, Red assessing the damage to the barn. Normal morning routines resuming despite the violence of the night. Alara had run from Philadelphia to escape one trap and walked straight into another. Had escaped that one only to land here, in a place so remote it barely qualified as civilization. She'd been attacked, nearly killed, and had watched a man die violently in her defense. And somehow, standing here in the morning light with these rough men beginning their day's work, she felt more free than she had in years. The thought should have scared her. Maybe it did, a little. But mostly it just settled into her chest like a promise she was making to herself. That whatever came next, she'd face it standing up. No more running, no more hoping someone else would fix her problems. She was done being rescued. Time to start fighting. The weeks that followed the attack settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal, if you didn't look too closely at the burned skeleton of the barn, or the way everyone still checked the horizon before relaxing. Alara threw herself into the work with the kind of desperation that came from needing to prove she was worth the trouble she'd caused. The ledgers were a disaster, but they were a disaster she could fix. She spent hours hunched over the desk, cross-referencing receipts with half-completed entries, tracking down missing information by asking Jack about transactions he barely remembered. Slowly, a picture emerged. The ranch was profitable, but barely. Too much money going out for supplies, not enough coming in from sales. The Army contract was solid, but they were undercharging compared to other breeders. "You need to raise your prices," she told Rowan one evening over dinner. He looked up from his plate. "Say that again." "Your prices, they're too low. I compared them to the quotes in these letters from other ranches. You're selling trained cavalry mounts for 30% less than your competitors." Jack snorted. "Told you that 2 years ago." "And I told you the Army likes our prices," Rowan countered. "The Army likes paying less than they should," Alara said, spreading out the papers she'd brought. "But look at the renewal terms. They're locked in for quantity, not price. You can renegotiate the rate without breaking the contract." Rowan studied the documents, his expression shifting from skeptical to thoughtful. "How much are we leaving on the table?" "At current volume, about $3,000 a year." Red whistled low. "That'd rebuild the barn and then some." "It would," Alara agreed, "and fund expansion if you wanted it. You've got the land, the expertise, you're just not charging what you're worth." Thomas leaned back in his chair. "The school teacher knows business. My father ran a small printing operation. I kept his books." She didn't mention how those books had shown the slow slide into debt, the impossible choices, the way numbers on paper translated to hunger and desperation. "Numbers don't lie. You're good at what you do. You should be paid accordingly." Rowan was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. Draft a letter to the Army Procurement Office. Professional, but firm. We'll see what they say." "Already did." She pulled another paper from her stack. "Just needs your signature." Jack laughed outright. "She's got you cornered, boss." "Apparently." But Rowan was almost smiling when he took the letter. "Anything else you've reorganized without asking?" "The inventory system is inefficient, the supply orders are redundant, and you're buying feed from a supplier in Denver when there's a mill in Helena that's closer and cheaper." "Hell," Red muttered. "She's going to run the whole operation by Christmas." "Someone should," Thomas said mildly. "We've been making it up as we go for years." The conversation moved on, but Alara caught Rowan watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not attraction, she'd learned to recognize that look from men, and this wasn't it, more like reassessment, seeing her as something other than the desperate girl who'd stumbled into his camp. After dinner, she helped clean up, a routine she'd fallen into despite Jack's protests that she didn't have to. The work felt good, normal, like she was contributing beyond just the bookkeeping. "You settling in all right?" Jack asked, washing dishes while she dried. "I think so." "No regrets about leaving Desolation Creek?" She thought about Silas's hand around her throat, the certainty that she'd die in that cellar. "None." "Good. Because that confidence you showed tonight, telling Rowan his business, that's what you need out here. Frontier doesn't reward meekness." "I'm learning that." "You're doing more than learning, you're adapting." He handed her another plate. "A lot of people can't. They come west expecting one thing, find another, and break under the difference. You bent instead." "I didn't have much choice." "Everyone has choices. You just made better ones than most." He pulled the plug, watched the water drain. "That business with the prices? You're right, by the way. We've been undervaluing ourselves for years. Too focused on the work to think about the business side. That's what you hired me for." "We hired you because Rowan felt guilty about his sister. You're earning your place because you're actually good at this." The directness of it caught her off guard. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just keep doing it." He dried his hands. "And learn to shoot properly. Thomas can teach you horses, but I'll teach you weapons. Can't have you freezing up again if trouble comes back." Trouble did come back, but not in the form she expected. 2 months after the attack, a different kind of visitor arrived. A man in a decent suit riding a decent horse, neither of which belonged on a working ranch. Alara was in the corral with Thomas, practicing her seat on copper, when Red called out a warning. "Rider coming! Looks official!" She dismounted, much more smoothly than her first attempts, though still not graceful, and joined the others in the yard. Rowan emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. The rider approached slowly, hands visible, making it clear he wasn't a threat. Up close, Alara could see he was maybe 40, with soft hands and a nervous expression. "Mr. Hale?" he called out. "That's me. I'm Robert Finch. I represent the Crow Estate in Desolation Creek." He pulled papers from his saddlebag. "I'm here about the matter of Silas Crow's death." The yard went very still. Alara's heart kicked into a faster rhythm, but she kept her face neutral. "What about it?" Rowan's voice was casual, but his posture had shifted subtly, weight balanced, ready to move. Finch dismounted, holding the papers like a shield. "Mr. Crow died intestate, without a will. As the owner of Crow's Palace and several other properties, there are legal matters to resolve. I've been attempting to piece together the circumstances of his death. He attacked my ranch. I defended it. He lost." Rowan's tone suggested that covered everything worth discussing. "Yes, well," Finch looked uncomfortable. "The witnesses to the attack have been unhelpful, but there's another matter. Mr. Crow had entered into a contract of marriage with a Miss Alara Quinn, who subsequently disappeared. There are questions about whether she was involved in the events leading to his death." "She wasn't," Rowan said flatly. "I'd prefer to hear that from Miss Quinn herself, if she's available." Alara stepped forward before anyone could stop her. "I'm Alara Quinn." Finch's eyes widened. "Miss Quinn, I'm relieved to find you alive. There were concerns that Silas killed me." He tried. She pulled down her collar, showing the faded but still visible bruises on her throat. "He came here, set fire to the barn, and attempted to drag me back to Desolation Creek. Mr. Hale stopped him." "I see." Finch looked genuinely disturbed by the marks. "And before that, the marriage contract was based on fraudulent representations. He promised partnership and respect. He delivered servitude and abuse. I left before the ceremony because I recognized the situation for what it was. The law would say you were contractually obligated." "The law can say whatever it wants," Alara interrupted. "I'm not property to be contracted for. I'm a person who made a decision to leave a dangerous situation. If your legal system has a problem with that, I suggest you examine your system, not my choices." Thomas made a small sound that might have been approval. Jack was openly grinning. Finch shifted his weight. "Miss Quinn, I'm not here to judge your decisions. I'm simply trying to resolve the estate. And there's the matter of—" He consulted his papers. "A Maria Gonzalez. She claims Mr. Crow owed her 2 years of wages. There are also unpaid debts to various suppliers, and the saloon itself is mortgaged beyond its value. Frankly, the estate is a mess." "So why are you here?" Rowan asked. "Because there's a possibility that Miss Quinn, as his intended bride, might have claim to portions of the estate. And because I wanted to confirm she wasn't buried somewhere on your ranch, which was a theory some people in town had advanced." "I'm very much alive," Alara said, "and I want nothing from Silas Crow's estate. Give whatever there is to Maria. She earned it more than anyone." Finch looked relieved. "If you could sign a statement to that effect, it would simplify matters considerably." She signed his papers. A formal renunciation of any claim to anything Silas had owned. It felt good, like cutting the last thread connecting her to that chapter of her life. After Finch left, heading back to Desolation Creek with his documents and his nervous energy, Jack let out a long breath. "Well, that could have gone worse." "Could have not happened at all," Red muttered. "It's done now," Rowan said. "And it's official. Crow's dead. Alara had nothing to do with it legally, and we can stop looking over our shoulders." But Alara found herself thinking about Maria, still in Desolation Creek, still working off a debt that would never be paid. She'd helped Alara escape, had given her information that probably saved her life. And now she was dealing with the wreckage of Silas's estate, probably still serving drinks to the same rough men. "I want to go back," she said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. "To Desolation Creek," she clarified, "to see Maria, to make sure she's all right." Bad idea, Thomas said immediately. Terrible idea, Jack agreed. I'm going anyway. She looked at Rowan. I know it's my day off tomorrow. I'll ride down, talk to her, ride back, just a few hours. Rowan studied her for a long moment. You know how to get there? I remember the route. And if there are still people in town who blame you for Crow's death, then I'll handle it. You mean I'll handle it, he corrected, because I'm going with you. You don't have to. I'm going with you, he repeated, voice firm. Non-negotiable. She wanted to argue, but the truth was she'd be glad for the company. The thought of riding back to Desolation Creek alone made her stomach tight with anxiety she didn't want to acknowledge. They left at dawn the next morning, 2 horses instead of 1, rifles in their saddle boots. The ride took most of the day, longer than when she'd fled, because they weren't running and the horses needed rest. They stopped at midday to water the animals and eat the food Jack had packed. You nervous? Rowan asked, watching her pick at her bread. Some. Want to talk about it? Not particularly. He accepted that. Didn't push. That was one thing she'd learned about him. He gave people space to have their feelings without demanding explanations. They reached Desolation Creek in late afternoon. The town looked exactly the same, still ugly, still rough, still the kind of place that ground people down to nothing. But Alara wasn't the same person who'd arrived here 3 months ago. That girl had been desperate and scared. This woman had learned to ride, to shoot, to stand her ground. The difference mattered. They rode straight to Crow's palace. The place looked worse without Silas running it. Windows dirtier, paint more faded, the whole structure sagging like it was tired of standing up. Inside was emptier than she remembered, only a handful of men drinking in the afternoon dimness. They looked up when Alara entered, and recognition rippled through the room. Conversation stopped. Where's Maria? Alara asked the room in general. One of the men, the bearded one who'd made the comment about her being prettier than the last bride, jerked his head toward the back. Upstairs, packing probably. Alara climbed the familiar stairs, Rowan a steady presence behind her. She found Maria in what had been Silas's room, sorting through clothes and papers. Maria looked up, and her face cycled through surprise, relief, and something close to joy. You're alive. So are you. They stared at each other for a moment, then Maria crossed the room and hugged her, quick and fierce. I thought maybe Crow found you, killed you. Nobody would say for certain. He tried. He failed. Alara stepped back. I heard about the estate. About the wages. Finch said I might actually get paid. Can you believe that? Maria's laugh was brittle. 2 years of serving drinks and dodging fists, and I might actually see some money for it. What will you do? Leave. Obviously. She gestured at the room. This place is going to auction. Nobody wants to run a saloon with Crow's reputation attached. I'll take whatever wages I get and go somewhere else. Somewhere that isn't here. Come with us, Alara said impulsively. Maria blinked. What? To the ranch. We need help. Someone to cook, manage the house. Jack's been doing it, but he's not great at it. You'd have your own space, real wages, and you wouldn't have to deal with drunk miners grabbing at you. I don't know anything about ranching. Neither did I 3 months ago. You learn. Alara looked at Rowan. If that's all right with you. He shrugged. Ranch can support another person. And Jack's cooking is pretty terrible. If she's willing to work, she's welcome. Maria looked between them, her expression carefully neutral. Why would you do this? You barely know me. You helped me when you didn't have to, Alara said. Told me where to find Rowan. Gave me information that probably saved my life. This is me returning the favor. I thought you said frontier life doesn't reward charity. It doesn't. This isn't charity. This is hiring someone competent for a job we need done. You want the position or not? A slow smile spread across Maria's face, the first real smile Alara had seen from her. When do we leave? Tomorrow morning. Gives you time to finish packing, settle things here. They stayed at the boarding house that night. Separate rooms, paid for with ranch money. Alara lay awake listening to the sounds of Desolation Creek outside her window, thinking about how different it felt being here by choice rather than desperation. In the morning, Maria met them with 2 bags and a determined expression. She'd settled her affairs, said whatever goodbyes needed saying, ready to start over. The ride back to the ranch took longer with 3 people, but the time passed easier. Maria had stories about Desolation Creek, the wild ones, the broken ones, the occasional decent person trying to survive in an indecent place. Some of the stories were funny. Some were heartbreaking. All of them painted a picture of a town slowly dying, bleeding out people and hope in equal measure. "You don't seem sad to leave," Rowan observed. "Why would I be? That place took 2 years of my life and gave me nothing but bruises and bad memories." Maria looked at the mountains ahead. "I'm not sentimental about prisons, even ones without bars." They reached the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the valley in colors that looked almost unreal. Jack came out to meet them, took in Maria with a raised eyebrow. "We hiring everyone who worked for Crow now?" "Just the ones who can cook," Rowan said. "Maria, this is Jack. Jack, Maria. She'll be handling the house and meals from now on." "Thank everything holy," Jack said with feeling. "I've been cooking for 4 men who deserve better. You know your way around a kitchen?" "Better than you, I'm guessing." "Low bar, but I'll take it." He helped her down from her horse. "We eat at sunset. You got 2 hours to prove you're worth keeping." Maria's smile had sharp edges. "Watch me." That night's dinner was better than anything they'd eaten in months. Real stew with vegetables that hadn't been boiled into mush, bread that was actually fresh, even a pie made from dried apples. The men ate like they were afraid the food would disappear if they slowed down. "You're hired," Red said through a mouthful of pie. "Permanently, forever. I don't care what you cost." "Told you," Maria said to Jack. "I never doubted," he replied. "Just had to maintain the appearance of standards." Later, after Maria had been shown to her cabin, the one Alara had lived in originally, since Alara had moved to a larger one closer to the office, Rowan found Alara on the porch of the main house. "That was a good thing you did today," he said. "It was practical. We needed a cook." "It was both." He sat beside her. "You're getting comfortable with this life." "Is that bad?" "No. It's good. Means you're not just surviving anymore, you're actually living." She thought about that. The difference between surviving and living. 3 months ago, she'd been in survival mode, just trying to get through each day without things getting worse. Now she was making decisions, solving problems, building something. "You ever think about going back?" Rowan asked. "To Philadelphia, I mean." "Never. There's nothing there for me now." She looked at him. "Do you ever think about leaving? Going somewhere less remote?" "No. This is where I belong, where I can do something that matters." He was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, my sister. She wanted a grand life. Cities, society, all that. I just wanted land and animals and room to breathe. Used to think maybe I was wrong, that I should want more. But out here I can protect people. Give them fair work, safe space. Can't do that in a city." "You've built something good here." "We've built something good," he corrected. "You're part of it now. Your ideas, your work. The ranch is better because you're here." The compliment settled warm in her chest. "Thank you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. One of the horses answered with a whinny. Normal sounds, home sounds. Alara had run from Philadelphia chasing a lie, had escaped Desolation Creek chasing survival, and somehow, without meaning to, she'd found something real here in the high country. Work that mattered, people who valued her, a place where she belonged. It wasn't the life she'd imagined. It was harder, rougher, more dangerous. But it was hers, built on honest work and genuine respect. And that, she was discovering, made all the difference. Winter came to the high country like a fist closing around everything that wasn't tough enough to survive it. The first snow fell in late October, and by November the valley was buried under 3 feet of white that turned the world into something beautiful and brutal in equal measure. Alara learned what frontier winter really meant. Not the romantic notion of cozy fires and gentle snowfall, but the reality of frozen water buckets at dawn, horses that needed constant care to prevent frostbite, and the kind of cold that made your lungs hurt just breathing. She learned to layer clothes until she could barely move, to recognize the signs of frostbite on her own fingers, to keep working even when everything in her body screamed to just go inside and stay there. The ranch pulled inward during those months. The men worked shorter days but harder ones, focused on keeping the animals alive and the building standing. Maria's cooking became the bright spot in each day, hot stews and fresh bread and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The evenings stretched long, Everyone gathered in the main house because the cold made isolation unbearable. It was during one of those long evenings, with wind howling outside and the fire burning low, that Red asked the question that had apparently been bothering him for months. "So what's the actual arrangement here?" He gestured between Alara and Rowan with his coffee cup. "Because everyone in town thinks you two are, together." Alara nearly choked on her own coffee. "We're not. That's not. We work together," Rowan said calmly, though his ears had gone slightly red. "That's it." "Right, sure." Red didn't look convinced. "Except you rebuilt her cabin to twice the size it was, and you ride out together every Sunday. And last month when that buyer from Denver was getting too friendly, you nearly broke his jaw. He was disrespectful. He asked if she was single. The way he asked was disrespectful." Jack was grinning into his stew. Thomas had developed a sudden fascination with the ceiling. Maria was watching the whole thing with undisguised amusement. "I just want to know if I should be planning for a wedding," Red continued, "because if so, I'll need time to get decent clothes. Can't show up to the boss's wedding looking like I've been wrestling horses." "There's no wedding," Alara said firmly, though her face felt hot. "Rowan gave me work. That's the whole story." "Uh-huh." Red set down his cup. "And the rest of us are just blind, apparently." "Drop it," Rowan said, and something in his tone made even Red back off. But the conversation lingered in Alara's mind after everyone had gone to their cabins for the night. She lay in her bed, the larger, warmer cabin that Rowan had indeed rebuilt over the summer, and tried to examine her own feelings honestly. She respected Rowan, trusted him, enjoyed his company, found him attractive in a quiet, understated way that had nothing to do with conventional handsomeness and everything to do with competence and integrity. But was that love? Or just gratitude mixed with proximity? She'd learned enough about frontier life to know that practical partnerships were common. People married for survival, for company, for help managing the endless work. Romance was a luxury most couldn't afford, but she'd also sworn to herself that she'd never again let desperation drive her decisions about men. So where did that leave her? The answer came a week later, in a way she didn't expect. A late-season storm blew in with unusual violence, dumping 2 feet of snow in as many hours. Alara was in the barn checking on a mare that was due to foal when she heard shouting from outside. Panic in the voices, which was rare enough to spike her heart rate. She ran out to find Thomas pointing toward the far pasture. "Red's out there. Went to check the fence line before the storm hit. Should have been back an hour ago." The wind was picking up, driving snow horizontal, visibility dropping to maybe 20 feet. Going out in this was dangerous. Staying out in it was probably fatal. "I'll go," Rowan said, already moving toward the horses. "Not alone, you won't." Alara was grabbing her heavy coat before she'd consciously decided to move. "He could be hurt. You might need help getting him back." "Alara, sit. I'm going. We can argue or we can leave. Pick one." For a moment, she thought he'd actually argue, but then he just nodded and started saddling 2 horses. Thomas and Jack gathered supplies: rope, blankets, a flask of whiskey for warmth. "Stay together," Jack said, his face grim. "Storm like this. You get separated. You're both dead." They rode out into the white chaos. The world disappeared within minutes. No landmarks, no horizon, just endless swirling snow and wind that cut through every layer of clothing. Rowan led, following the fence line by feel more than sight, and Alara stayed so close behind that her horse's nose almost touched his horse's tail. Time became meaningless. Could have been 20 minutes, could have been 2 hours. The cold worked its way into her bones despite the layers, and her face went numb where the scarf didn't cover it. She focused on Rowan's back, on keeping her horse moving, on not thinking about what would happen if they couldn't find Red. Then Rowan held up a hand and dismounted. Alara followed and saw why. A dark shape in the snow, partially buried. Red, unconscious, his horse standing over him like it was trying to provide shelter. "He's alive," Rowan said, checking for a pulse. "But we need to move fast. Help me get him on the horse." Together they managed to lift Red, dead weight, literally unconscious, and drape him across Rowan's saddle. Rowan mounted behind him, holding him in place. Alara took the reins of Red's horse, tying it to her own saddle. "Can you follow the fence back?" Rowan asked, his voice barely audible over the wind. "I think so." "Don't think. No. Because if we get lost out here, we're all dead." She nodded, took the lead, and started back the way they'd come. The fence was her lifeline. She kept one hand on it, following it post by post, trusting that it would lead them home. Her hand went numb after the first 10 minutes, but she didn't let go. The ranch appeared out of the white like a miracle. Buildings materializing from nothing, lamplight and windows marking safety. Thomas and Jack ran out to help, pulling Red down from the horse, carrying him inside. Alara's legs gave out the moment she tried to dismount. Rowan caught her, his arm around her waist, holding her up. "You did good," he said into her ear, so quiet she almost missed it under the wind. "Really good." They got inside. Maria had hot coffee ready, blankets warming by the fire. Red was laid out near the hearth, unconscious but breathing steady. His fingers were white with frostbite, and his lips were blue, but he was alive. "Fence gave way," Jack said, examining Red's legs. "Post must have snapped in the wind. Looks like his horse threw him when it happened. Probably knocked him out when he landed." "He'll lose some fingers," Thomas said quietly, looking at Red's hands. "Maybe toes, too. But he'd live. That was what mattered." Alara sat by the fire, drinking coffee she couldn't taste through her numb lips, and felt something crystallize in her chest. Rowan had trusted her in that storm, had put Red's life, and his own, in her hands when he asked if she could follow the fence back. That wasn't the kind of trust you gave someone you were just working with. That was the kind of trust you gave a partner. She looked across the room and found him watching her, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of something neither of them had put into words yet. Red woke up around midnight, groggy and confused. "What happened?" "You nearly died," Jack said bluntly. "Alara and Rowan went out in a blizzard and dragged your frozen carcass back." "Oh." Red looked at his hands, wrapped in bandages now, fingers splinted. "How bad?" "You'll probably lose 2 fingers, maybe 3. Thomas's voice was matter-of-fact. "Could be worse." "Could be dead," Red agreed. He looked at Alara. "Thank you." "Thank Rowan. He's the one who found you." "Thank you both, then." He leaned back, exhausted. "Though I'm going to be useless come spring." "You'll adapt," Rowan said. "Everyone does." Over the next weeks, as Red healed and winter continued its assault on the valley, the dynamics in the house shifted in ways too subtle to name, but impossible to miss. Alara found herself working alongside Rowan more, their conversations stretching beyond business into territory that was more personal. They talked about their pasts, hers in Philadelphia, his growing up on a failed farm in Missouri, about their families, their losses, the choices that had led them here. "You ever regret it?" she asked one evening when they were alone in the office, working through spring contracts. "Leaving Missouri? Coming out here?" "No. I regret what happened to Sarah, regret not finding her sooner. But coming here? Building this?" He gestured at the papers, the ranch beyond the windows. "This is the first thing I've done that feels like it matters." "It does matter. You've given people a place where they're valued, where their work means something." "We've given people that," he corrected. "The ranch was barely profitable before you fixed the books. You turned it into an actual business." "You would have figured it out eventually. Maybe. But you did it now, and that makes a difference." He set down his pen. "I'm not good with words, Alara. Not the kind of words people use for feelings. But I want you to know that having you here, it's been good. For the ranch, yes, but also for me." Her heart did something complicated in her chest. "Rowan, you don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know." But she did have something to say, and it had been building for months. "When I came here, I was running. From Silas, from my past, from the idea that I'd never have choices again. You gave me those choices back. Let me build something on my own terms, and somewhere in the process, I stopped running." "That's good. I'm not finished." She took a breath. "I stayed because of the work at first, because I needed the money and the safety. But that's not why I'm staying now. I'm staying because this is home, because you're—" She stopped, searching for words that weren't borrowed from dime novels or cheap sentiment. "Because when I think about leaving, about going anywhere else, it feels wrong. And when I think about staying, about building a life here with you and everyone else, it feels right. Does that make sense?" "Yes." His voice was rough. "It makes sense. Red asked if we were together. We said no. But I don't think that's actually true anymore, is it?" "No, I don't think it is." They looked at each other across the desk covered in ledgers and contracts, and Alara felt the last piece of her old life fall away. She wasn't the desperate bride anymore. Wasn't the mail order woman who'd nearly died in a saloon cellar. She was a rancher's partner in business and in life, and that was something she'd chosen freely. Rowan stood, came around the desk, and held out his hand. She took it, let him pull her to her feet. They stood close, not quite touching, and she could see herself reflected in his eyes. Stronger than she'd been, harder maybe, but also more real. "This is probably a bad idea," she said, "mixing business with everything else." "Probably." He was almost smiling. "You want to back out?" "No, do you?" "No." He kissed her then, tentative at first, like he was afraid she'd pull away, then deeper when she didn't. It was nothing like the dime novels she'd read as a girl, where kisses were passionate and consuming. This was quieter, steadier. The kind of kiss that promised partnership rather than rescue, mutual respect rather than possession. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably tell the others." "They already know. Red made that abundantly clear." "Right. Well then." He stepped back, picked up his pen. "We should finish these contracts." "Now?" "Business first, that's how this works." She laughed, actually laughed, and picked up her own pen. They worked side by side until the contracts were done, and if their hands brushed occasionally or their feet touched under the desk, well, that was nobody's business but theirs. Spring came eventually, the way it always did, slowly at first, then all at once. The snow retreated up the mountains, leaving mud and new grass and the kind of green that hurt to look at after months of white. Red adapted to his missing fingers better than anyone expected, learning to rope and ride with the remaining ones. Maria expanded the garden, talking about preserving food for next winter. Thomas started training a new batch of colts, patient as ever with the young horses. And Alara watched the ranch transform from winter survival mode into spring productivity, feeling something like pride settle into her bones. This was hers now. Not because someone had promised it to her in a letter, not because she'd had no other options, but because she'd earned it through work and determination and the choice to stay when she could have run. In late April, the Army representative arrived for the contract renewal. He was a colonel this time, not a clerk, which suggested they were taking the relationship more seriously. "Mr. Hale," he said, shaking Rowan's hand, "I've reviewed your proposal. The price increase is significant. It reflects the quality of our horses and the training we provide." Rowan replied calmly, "You won't find better cavalry mounts anywhere in the territory." "Perhaps, but—" "Colonel," Alara stepped forward, carrying a folder. "If you'll look at these comparisons, you'll see we're still below market rate for trained military horses. We're simply asking for fair compensation for exceptional work." The colonel took the folder, flipped through it. His expression shifted from skeptical to thoughtful. "These numbers are accurate?" "Completely. I can provide documentation for every claim." "And you are?" "Alara Quinn. I manage the ranch's business operations." He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Miss Quinn, Mr. Hale, I believe we can reach an agreement on these terms." They negotiated for 2 hours, but by the end they had a new contract, 3 years instead of 1, with prices that would allow the ranch to expand, to hire more help, to build a proper barn to replace the one Silas had burned. After the colonel left, heading back to Fort Ellis with signed papers, Jack let out a whoop that probably scared the horses. "Do you know what this means?" He grabbed the contract, waved it in the air. "This means we're not just surviving, we're actually thriving." "Means we can pay everyone properly," Rowan added. "Build that bunkhouse we've been talking about. Maybe even hire a few more hands." "Means I can expand the kitchen," Maria said. "Get a proper stove instead of that monster I've been fighting all winter." Thomas just smiled, but his eyes were bright with satisfaction. That night, they celebrated with whiskey Jack had been saving for a special occasion, and a dinner Maria had clearly been planning. As the evening wore on and the conversation flowed, Alara found herself watching the people around the table, Jack telling a story with wild hand gestures, Thomas correcting the details, Red heckling from the side, Maria laughing at all of them, Rowan watching everyone with quiet contentment. This was her family now. Not the one she'd been born into, but the one she'd chosen. The one that had chosen her back. Later, after everyone had gone to bed, and she and Rowan were alone on the porch, watching stars emerge, he asked, "You happy?" She thought about it, really thought about it, not just giving the easy answer. Yes, I think I am. Good. He took her hand, laced his fingers through hers. I know this isn't the life you imagined when you left Philadelphia. No, it's better. She squeezed his hand. That life was built on expectations I didn't choose. This one, I chose every piece of it, even the parts that are hard, especially those, because the hard parts are what make the good parts mean something. They sat in comfortable silence, and Alara thought about the journey that had brought her here. The train ride west, chasing promises that turned out to be lies. The desperate escape from Silas, not knowing if she'd survived the night. The slow, painful process of learning to be competent at things she'd never imagined doing. The moments of doubt, of fear, of wanting to give up. And through it all, the steady accumulation of small victories. Learning to ride, fixing the books, standing her ground in negotiations, choosing to stay when she could have left, building something real with people who valued her for who she was, not who they wanted her to be. The frontier had a reputation for breaking people, and Alara had seen enough to know that reputation was earned. But it also had a way of revealing who people really were beneath all the social expectations and inherited roles. Out here, you couldn't hide behind class or connections or polite fictions. You were exactly as capable as your actions proved you to be. And Alara had proven herself capable of more than she'd ever imagined. I've been thinking, Rowan said, breaking the comfortable silence, about making this official. The partnership? All of it. Business and otherwise. He turned to face her. I'm not proposing. I know you've got history with proposals and marriages and all that, but I wanted you to know that when you're ready, if you're ready, I'd be honored to make this permanent. Her throat tightened. You're sure? Because I'm not always easy to work with. I argue when I think you're wrong. I have opinions about everything. I'm probably too stubborn for my own good. I know. That's part of why I want to make it permanent. And the other parts? You're brilliant with numbers. You make everyone around you better. You rode into a blizzard to help save Red without hesitating. You turned a failing ranch into a thriving business. He paused. And you look at me like I'm not broken, like what happened with Sarah doesn't define everything I am. It doesn't. It shaped you, but it doesn't define you. See? That right there, that's what I'm talking about. He smiled, a real smile, not the careful, controlled expressions he usually wore. So when you're ready, let me know. No pressure, no timeline. Just know that I'm sure. Alara looked at him, this quiet man who'd given her choices when everyone else had tried to take them away. Who'd trusted her with his business, his home, his life. Who'd killed to protect her and then given her space to become her own person rather than making her dependent on him. I'm ready, she said. You're sure? Because we can wait. Take time to... Rowan, I'm sure. She stood, pulled him to his feet. I spent months running from one bad situation, then months surviving in a better one. But I'm done running and done just surviving. I want to build something. With you, starting now. He kissed her then, under the stars that had witnessed her arrival and her transformation, and it felt like sealing a promise they'd both been making in small ways for months. They married quietly a month later. No preacher, just Thomas performing the ceremony as ranch foreman with legal authority in the territory. Jack stood witness, making jokes to cover the fact that he was tearing up. Maria made a cake that was slightly lopsided but delicious. Red gave a speech that was inappropriate and heartfelt in equal measure. It was nothing like the wedding Alara had almost had in Desolation Creek. No force, no fear, no sense of being trapped. Just two people choosing each other freely, witnessed by friends who'd become family. That summer they broke ground on the new barn. By fall, it was finished, bigger than the old one, with proper ventilation and storage. They hired 3 new hands to help with the expanded operation. The Army contract brought steady business, and word spread about the quality of their horses. Buyers started coming from Colorado, Wyoming, even California. Maria married Thomas in a ceremony even quieter than Alara and Rowan's, and nobody was surprised when it happened. They'd been circling each other for months, both of them carrying enough past hurt to be careful, but both brave enough to try anyway. Red started courting a girl from the nearest neighboring ranch, 8 miles away, which counted as neighbors in this country. Jack claimed he was too old for romance, but seemed suspiciously happy with his bachelor status. The ranch grew, not quickly, but steadily. Each season brought new challenges, harsh winters, dry summers, difficult horses, demanding buyers. But they handled each problem as it came, working together, trusting each other's expertise. And through it all, Alara kept the books with the same precision she'd brought to that first ledger. The numbers told a story of growth, of success built on honest work and fair dealing. She'd learned that numbers never lied, but they also never told the whole truth. Behind every transaction was a person, a choice, a moment where someone decided to trust or walk away. She chose trust, every time. 5 years after arriving at the ranch, Alara stood on the porch of the main house, expanded now, with proper windows and a second story, and looked at what they'd built. Horses in the pastures, buildings in good repair, people she cared about living lives they'd chosen. Rowan came out carrying their daughter, 2 years old, red-faced from crying, clearly in need of her mother. Alara took her, settled her against her hip with the practiced ease of repetition. "She's teething again," Rowan said apologetically. "I know, Maria made that root tea. Should help." She rocked the baby gently, feeling the weight of her, the small person who existed because Alara had run from one life and chosen another. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Rowan asked. "Sometimes. Not often." She looked at him. "Why?" "Just grateful, I guess. That you got on that train. That you had the courage to run when you needed to. And lucky that you gave me work instead of sending me back. That wasn't luck. That was recognizing someone worth keeping around." He put his arm around her shoulders, and they stood there together, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Their daughter stopped crying, distracted by something only she could see. In the distance, one of the hands was singing, off-key but enthusiastic. From the kitchen came the smell of Maria's cooking, and the sound of Jack arguing with Thomas about something that probably didn't matter. This was home. Not the one Alara had been born into, not the one she'd been promised in fraudulent letters, but the one she'd built with her own hands, her own choices, her own determination to be more than circumstances wanted to allow. The frontier had tried to break her, had thrown everything it had at her: violence, isolation, harsh conditions, impossible choices. But she'd bent instead of breaking, adapted instead of surrendering, and built a life that was entirely her own. And standing there with her family around her and the mountains at her back, Alara understood something she'd been too young to know when she left Philadelphia. Freedom wasn't given. It was taken, piece by piece, choice by choice, moment by moment. It was the accumulation of small rebellions against the idea that your life belonged to anyone but yourself. She'd been a mail-order bride who refused to be delivered, a desperate woman who'd chosen dignity over safety, a city girl who'd learned to thrive in wilderness, and now she was a rancher, a wife, a mother, a businesswoman, each role chosen freely, each identity earned through work rather than inherited through circumstance. The sunset painted everything gold and amber, and Alara held her daughter close and felt something very close to contentment settle into her bones. The journey had been hard. The destination was worth it. And if there was a lesson in all of it, if there was something she'd tell another desperate girl climbing onto a westbound train chasing promises that might be lies, it was this: you are never as trapped as you think you are. There are always choices, even when they're all bad. And sometimes the choice to walk away from what's destroying you, even without knowing what comes next, is the bravest thing you'll ever do. She'd made that choice on a platform in Desolation Creek, terrified and alone. Had made it again in a cellar with Silas's hand around her throat. Had made it 1,000 times in smaller ways since, choosing to stay, to work, to trust, to build. And every single time, the choice had led her closer to the life she was living now. A life that was hers. Completely, absolutely, undeniably hers. The stars came out one by one, filling the vast Montana sky. Rowan took their daughter inside to put her to bed. Maria called that dinner was ready. Jack's laughter echoed across the yard. Alara took one more moment on the porch, breathing in the cold, clean air, looking at the empire they'd built from nothing but determination and honest work. Then she went inside to join her family, closing the door on the past and stepping fully into the life she'd chosen. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.